Every year, I rank my favorite matches of the year. I have been keeping a running log all year long. I ended the year with 32 matches on my list. And I do want to stress, this is my list. Your list is going to look very different. And it's always difficult to narrow it down to just 15, which is what I've been doing. So I gave myself some latitude. I expanded it to 20. We're doing a top 20 this year. And then to rank them is even harder. There's been lots of terrific matches this year from WWE, AEW, Impact, New Japan, even House of Glory, as someone who got to call many of them. First, though, some honorable mentions that did not make the final cut, but I do think deserve some love. Bryan Danielson, I have the first 3 matches I have on here are Bryan Danielson matches. We got Danielson against Konosuke Takeshita from Dynamite on January 11th, against Bandito on January 18th, against Roosh on February 8th. That's when MJF was making him run the gauntlet here and wrestle all these different people. And you could pretty much add every single Bryan Danielson match so far in this Continental Classic, including last night's time limit draw against Claudio. This man is a machine. But I would throw in Roman Reigns against Sami Zayn from the Elimination Chamber. It's just an incredible atmosphere for that match. Kenny Omega against Vikingo on Dynamite back on March 22nd. Roman Reigns against Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania Night 2. Up until the finish. The Four Pillars match for the AEW World title at Double or Nothing back in May. MJF against Adam Cole for the World Championship at All In at Wembley Stadium. Gunther against Chad Gable for the Intercontinental title on Raw back on September 4th. That was the same week that he broke the Honky Tonk Man's record as the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time. Christian Cage against Darby Allin, 2 out of 3 falls at Wrestle Dream. And Will Osprey against Speedball Mike Bailey from Impact's Bound for Glory pay-per-view in October. Those are just some of the honorable mentions that I thought were worth giving a shout out to. Last year, for the second year in a row, the top spot on this list went to the tag teams. My number 1 match of the year went to the entire trilogy of matches between FTR and the Briscoes. And I called it the best trilogy since Omega against Okada, and I stand by that. And then not even a month later, Jay Briscoe was gone. And it's still hard to comprehend. So do we go 3 years in a row with the tag team match in the top spot? Let's find out. We'll kick things off with number 20 in the countdown, Becky Lynch against Trish Stratus in a steel cage match at WWE Payback on September 2nd. Throughout that entire feud, I gave them a lot of shit for what was really a very underwhelming feud. The promos, the segments on TV, I was ready for it to just be over. Just wasn't very good. They got left off the SummerSlam card. I'm sure that didn't make either of them very happy. They went out there at the beginning of this pay-per-view and they killed it. And I don't know if that's going to end up being Trish's last match. Apparently not. Actually, now that I think about it, she did an interview this week and said she was looking forward to getting back in the ring next year. So I don't know if that means she'll maybe be one of the entrants in the Women's Royal Rumble match, but obviously Trish in her mind doesn't think that she's done yet. But if she was, this would be a hell of a match for her to go out on. Number 19 is the first time a Pro Wrestling Noah match has graced my countdown, I do believe. It was champion against champion, the IWGP champion Kazuchika Okada against the GHC heavyweight champion Kaito Kiyomiya from the Pro Wrestling Noah Last Love show at the Tokyo Dome on February 21st. The main attraction on the show was the retirement match for Keiji Muto, the Great Muta. But this was the other big attraction. This was coming out of that great worked shoot angle that the two of them did just prior to this. They were a part of that back in January. Okada walked in here. He was very dismissive of Kiyomiya. Kiyomiya was intense. He was out, to prove something. Like he was just trying to earn this man's respect and prove him wrong for thinking that he was an underling, which is basically how Okada treated him in the build-up to this and in the match itself. And it got more competitive, and Okada finally connected with a Rainmaker, but then he pulled up Kiyomiya's head before the 3 count just so he could punish him some more, and then he pinned him. And it felt like we were, which was, again, if you think about it, Kiyomiya was like the top star for Noah at the time. And so for him to be treated like this, I mean, it felt like we were headed for another match, and we still haven't gotten one. Only a handful of interactions between the two in tags over the past year. I hope we get another chapter, because the first one was great, and it really reinvigorated Okada in many ways. Not that he's been kind of riding his coattails, but he's been kind of stagnant for a while. This almost like woke up the beast within, and it made Okada as interesting as he's been in many years. And so I would love to see the two of them back in the ring at some point next year. Number 18 is Mercedes Moné against Kyrie from New Japan's Battle in the Valley on February 18th. We did not get to see much of Mercedes in the ring outside of WWE before she broke her ankle, unfortunately. She only had a handful of matches, but what we did see was really good. And this was the best of them all, against Kyrie, who is now back in WWE. Mercedes may be joining her there very soon. We could get the rematch next year in a WWE ring. But they had an excellent 25-minute match that ended with Mercedes winning the IWGP Women's Championship, which I know was a bucket list thing for her. Number 17 is a match that some people might be shocked that I have this low, but there were a lot of great matches this year, and I know these two can deliver even better than what they gave us here. And I think they will in 2 weeks. It's Bryan Danielson against Kazuchika Okada in a dream match from Forbidden Door on June 25th. Tony Khan finally got the rights to Final Countdown, and watching Bryan Danielson walk out to that song for the first time in almost 15 years was fantastic. And you know it's a big deal when we get holy shit chants before the two of them even touch. This match, it hits different knowing now that Danielson worked the last 10 minutes of it with a broken arm. And he ends up tapping out Okada, which was shocking. But the announcers did a very good job of explaining that if Okada did not tap, he was risking injury heading into the G1, which kicked off the following month. So it was an excellent match. It started slow and it built like many of Okada's matches do. But as good as this was, it still felt like they were holding back for a rematch. And at the time, I figured that meant a rematch at the Tokyo Dome with Okada getting his win back. And now, less than 2 weeks out from the rematch, I still feel the same way. Number 16 wasn't just one of the best women's matches of the year. It was one of the best matches of 2023, with Athena defending her Ring of Honor Women's World Championship against Willow Nightingale at Death Before Dishonor on July 21st. This was the first time in the 20-plus year history of Ring of Honor that two women headlined a pay-per-view. Willow had her entire family in the front row. Her mom and dad were there. She had already lost to Athena once earlier in the year. They had a great TV match. Although, is it really on TV if it's not on a TV network? I don't know. But they had a great match back in February. Willow did get her win back against Athena in an Owen Hart tournament match over the summer. Once I saw her family out there, though, I thought for sure we were getting a title change. And then we didn't. Sound familiar? We just had a similar situation at Final Battle last week with Athena beating Billie Starkz. But Billie Starkz, she's 19 years old. She just graduated high school last year. That wasn't totally shocking that they wouldn't be ready to put the belt on her yet. That was not as surprising to me as this was. I liked the little callbacks in the match to moves that were used by other women in the division over the years. Sarah Del Rey, Daisy Hayes, Mickie James. And the announcers were quick to point them out when they happened. Here we are now 5 months later, and I'm in the same boat where I don't know what's next for Athena. What Roman Reigns is to the Undisputed title and what Gunther is to the Intercontinental title is what Athena is to that Ring of Honor Women's title. And like Gunther, she keeps cranking out great match after great match. Number 15 is Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn against Finn Balor and Damian Priest in a Steel City street fight for the Undisputed Tag Team titles at WWE Payback on September 2nd. It was the match I was most looking forward to on that show, and it actually over-delivered. We actually got some real color in this match, a lot of it from Kevin Owens, who either got busted open hard way or, more likely, wanted the company to think that he did because they made him wipe it away awfully quick. But he was wearing a t-shirt in tribute to the late Terry Funk. So that is a mighty big coincidence if it was by accident that the one guy wearing a Terry Funk shirt is the one who bled. Was it overbooked? You bet it was. Tons of interference from the other Judgment Day members. It took every single one of them to take those tag team titles away from Sami and KO, but I'll be damned if I didn't have a ton of fun watching this match. This was easily one of my favorite matches in WWE all year. Number 14 is another one of those matches where you may think I'm crazy for ranking it this low, but that's why it's my list and not yours. Bryan Danielson against Zack Sabre Jr. from AEW Wrestle Dream on October 1st. The match was supposed to happen at Forbidden Door last year, but Danielson got concussed and it never happened. No one was more excited about this match than Jon Moxley, who sat in on commentary for this, and once he started talking about this weird tantric sex stuff that Danielson was into reading about, Excalibur quickly tried to change the subject to Antonio Inoki and Billy Robinson, who I'm guessing were not into tantric sex, but who knows, maybe they were. We don't know, right? You never know what kind of weird shit people are into. I don't care what Billy Robinson was into, that's his business. But Danielson got the win after 2 Busaiku knees. This was a wrestling clinic. This was a masterclass in professional wrestling between 2 of the very best in the world. If you are a fan of either one of these men, you know what their style entails. If you could picture in your head what a Bryan Danielson-Zack Sabre Jr. match would look like, that's exactly what this was. And it did not disappoint. Number 13 is FTR against Jay White and Juice Robinson of Bullet Club Gold in a tag team title eliminator match on the July 8th episode of AEW Collision. This was from the early days of Collision, and these 4 men were the highlights of those early weeks. Now, this match clocked in at almost half an hour. This was tag team excellence. Even with what I thought was a flat finish. They gave us a pay-per-view worthy match. Bullet Club Gold goes over on the champs, which earned them a shot at the tag team titles. And as great as this match was, they would top themselves the following week. More on that later. Number 12 is Kenny Omega against Konosuke Takeshita from AEW All Out on September 3rd. Takeshita is a special talent, and his heel turn should have been the thing that took him to that next level. The jury is still out on that because it feels like he's been stuck in suspended animation in the 3.5 months that have passed since this match. But what a match this was. That Avalanche Blue Thunder Bomb by Takeshita still lives rent-free in my head. The fans were stunned by the finish when he pinned Omega after that knee strike. I thought with Takeshita getting the pin on Kenny in the tag match at All In, that Omega, which was a week before this, that Omega was going to, effectively get the win back at All Out, but instead they put Takeshita over twice. He got 2 pinfall wins back-to-back weeks over Kenny Omega and has nothing to show for it since. Tony Khan needs to correct this quickly. Even if that means moving on to something else with Takeshita, because Kenny, of course, is out indefinitely. We don't know when he's going to be back. But that doesn't mean that Takeshita should be sitting on the sidelines. There's an international title that would look great around the guy's waist. This was the biggest win of his career, and so far, it feels like it meant nothing. Number 11 in the countdown is Charlotte Flair against Rhea Ripley for the SmackDown Women's Championship at WrestleMania 39 on April 1st. Rhea Ripley finally gets her revenge on Charlotte after Charlotte beat her at COVID Mania 36 for the NXT Women's title. You know these 2 women wanted badly to be in that main event spot on that night, and they thought they deserved it, but they didn't get it. So they went out there and they proved to be more than worthy of headlining night 1. This was an excellent match that saw Rhea win the title with an avalanche riptide, and Charlotte looked genuinely happy for Rhea when the match was over. Because they knew. They knew they delivered. They knew they delivered an all-timer, so they were both very happy. And for my money, it's the best women's match of 2023. Now we get into the top 10. And we begin with number 10. It is the match that beat out Charlotte and Rhea to headline night 1 of WrestleMania. It is the Usos against Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn for the undisputed tag team titles. For the first time in nearly 40 years of WrestleMania, the tag team titles closed out the show. And it was very close between this and the women's title match. If I had my own newsletter and my own star rating system, and I love the Young Bucks, it would have been the difference of maybe half a star between these two matches. But the story is what carried this to the finish line. 622 days for the Usos as tag team champions, the longest reigning tag team champions in WWE history. The action was great, the drama was great, the story paid off. Predictably, but just because it was predictable doesn't mean it was bad. Any outcome other than the one that we got here would have been bad. This was exactly the way it should have been. Sami Zayn, with 3 haluva kicks, pins Jey Uso to win the tag team titles. Even a year ago, let alone 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have been unheard of for a tag team title match to close out a WrestleMania, even with 2 nights. It would have been unheard of. This year it made sense. It was the right call. Number 9 is a familiar face. There's that Bryan Danielson guy again, and this time he wrestled Ricky Starks in a strap match at AEW All Out on September 3rd. This is the greatest strap match in wrestling history, and it was announced on 24 hours notice. Danielson was a replacement for CM Punk, who had just been terminated by Tony Khan and very likely would have headlined the show in Chicago against Ricky Starks. This did not headline the show, but there was no topping this. So whoever went on after this, and look, there were great matches on the card that night, right? I've talked about Omega and Takeshita. There was a great match between Jon Moxley and Orange Cassidy. A lot of great stuff on that show, but there was no topping this. A symphony of violence is how I would describe this. They whipped the absolute dog shit out of each other. There was no part of their anatomy that was safe from that strap. Both men bled. It felt like Danielson's way of initiating Ricky Starks. You want to be a top guy? Let me show you what it takes to be a top guy. And Ricky had no problem dishing it out as much as he was taking it. And the finish was great too, because even though Danielson won, Ricky never tapped out. He hung in there until the bitter end. He only lost because he passed out. Like Stone Cold at WrestleMania 13. That was a star-making performance for Steve Austin. The jury is still out on what 2024 holds for Ricky Starks. Right now, he's one half of the World Tag Team Champions. But he's got bigger things in his future, and I think you'll be able to trace his ascent back to this match right here. The only thing shocking about this next entry, which is number 8 on my countdown, is that I did not rank it higher, because I wanted to. I wanted to rank this higher on this list. I just couldn't do it, because there are just so many other matches that I think deserve to be ahead of it. This may be the most polarizing pick of all, but I don't care. Number 8 is Damian Priest against Bad Bunny in a San Juan street fight at WWE Backlash on May 6th. This was WWE's first pay-per-view in Puerto Rico in 18 years, and hopefully it will not be another 18 before they go back. One of the hottest crowds all year, and I loved everything about this, from Bad Bunny's entrance to the post-match celebration. If I had to describe this in one word, this match in one word, that word would be fun. This was just fun, man. Very few matches I've seen this year where I had more fun than I did watching this. I described it as sports entertainment in the best way possible. I compared it to Steve Austin against Dude Love from Over the Edge 98, which happens to be one of my all-time favorite matches. Both matches were comically overbooked, but it actually made the match better. And by the end of it, both crowds were losing their minds. And the one that I felt really happy for was Damian Priest. He was the lone member of the Judgment Day to be left off the WrestleMania card. This was his WrestleMania. And there was no following this, so I'm not sure why they didn't headline with it. They put this in the middle of the show. Bad Bunny has proven to be one of the best celebrities they've ever used in the ring. He's a real fan. Clearly, he's put the work in. He doesn't go out there and embarrass himself or the people he's working with. He took a lot of bumps here, including a falcon arrow off of a production case in the crowd down through 2 tables. The Judgment Day got involved. Rey Mysterio came out to the Bunny's aid. He got beaten down. That's when we got the surprise cameo from Carlito to his old music, which they never should have ditched. And my God, what a reaction this guy got. Just for his music playing, what a reaction Carlito got. That reaction, by the way, is what earned him a contract. I guarantee you that. We even got a Savio Vega cameo. And the people went nuts for that too, because they know Savio very well down in Puerto Rico. This had everything. I love this match, and if this was strictly a WWE list, this would be in my top 3. Number 7 is MJF against Kenny Omega for the AEW World Championship on the October 28th episode of AEW Collision. One of the best matches in the short history of Collision, and a huge win for MJF, a clean win over Kenny Omega. That surprised me. That surprised me more than anything else, because I thought for sure the Callis family was going to get involved. There'd be some kind of screwy finish. Don Callis did run out to try to get involved, but it didn't factor into the finish. They only wanted you to think that it was going to factor into it, but it didn't. They had a 30-minute match that could have main evented a pay-per-view easily, and maybe it should have. Tony Khan got a lot of criticism for booking this match on short notice for television instead of building it up for a pay-per-view. But they had a story they were trying to tell, and they had very little time to tell it, which is that MJF was only days away from passing Omega as the longest reigning AEW World Champion of all time. So they had to do the match when they did, and tease that Omega might win the title and preserve his record. But he didn't win the title, he lost, and he lost the record as well. And when it was over, Omega took the microphone and he put MJF over in the strongest way that he possibly could. And you could see that was real emotion on MJF's face. He knew what a big deal it was to get that endorsement from Kenny. And it was just a great pro wrestling match. Number 6 is the Texas Death Match between Hangman Adam Page and Swerve Strickland from AEW Full Gear on November 18th. The most violent match in AEW history. And the most violent match that I've ever seen. I mean, they put the death in death match here. There were moments that were uncomfortable to watch. There were moments, the whole blood drinking, him drinking Swerve's blood, I hated that. But when you break into the man's home and you stalk his family, when you have a grudge match like this, the appropriate response is what we got here in this match. This wasn't about technical wrestling. This wasn't about fancy moves and dives and all that kind of stuff. This was 2 men trying to maim one another. I don't think it needed the Brian Cage interference. I think it actually took the match down a notch because of that. But these 2 men gave everything. I mean, they gave everything of themselves. They left pieces of themselves on the mat. Most importantly, though, it was 2 straight wins for Swerve over a former AEW World Champion. That is how you put someone over. The win at Wrestle Dream was nice. And that was also a very good match. But the win at Full Gear was even better as far as Swerve, because now it was 2-0 instead of just 1. And now it positions him for bigger things in 2024. Is he going to win the Continental Classic? No, I don't think he is. But he doesn't have to. With any luck, he'll be wrestling for the world title within the next 6 months. And we'll be able to look back on this match as the one that launched him there, and I think opened up a lot of eyes that maybe were not open before. This was a spectacle, is what this was. Now we get to the top 5. Number 5 is the best damn tag team match of the entire year, and maybe the best tag team match in the history of American television. FTR against Bullet Club Gold, best 2 out of 3 falls for the AEW World Tag Team titles on the July 15th episode of Collision. After I watched the MJF Kenny Omega match in October, I said that I thought it may have edged out this match as the best match in Collision history. But I also said I'm going to have to probably go back and rewatch them because it was close. And so I did. I went back and I rewatched them, and it was close, and this was the better of the 2 matches. It was also better than their first match, the one that I have at number 13. This was 58 minutes of some of the best pro wrestling that you will ever see. And they really had you thinking that they were going to go the full hour, but then FTR wins it with 2 minutes left to spare. And it started out slow because they knew they were going to be going almost an hour. There was a lot of stalling in that opening fall. And then it only just picked up from there. FTR tied it up, and that took us to the third and final fall. And they were in Calgary. So, of course, the people went nuts for the dueling sharpshooters that FTR put on Jay and Juice. FTR lets go from exhaustion and from crouching in that position for so long. So Dax takes his knee pad and he pulls it down around his shin so that he could reapply the hold with even more pressure and lean back even more and crouch down even deeper. And he finally gets Juice Robinson to tap out. I mean, this had action, this had drama, it had psychology, it had a hot crowd that was invested, it had everything that you would, if you had a checklist of things that you would look for in a match, this checked every single one of those boxes. And it reminded me of some of those classic NXT matches that the Revival had with American Alpha and with DIY. Those are some of the greatest tag team matches I've ever seen. It's why FTR is one of the greatest tag teams, if not the greatest tag team, of the last 20 years. I mean, how can you argue otherwise? Number 4 takes us back to WrestleMania. It was the triple threat match for the Intercontinental Championship, Gunther, Sheamus, and Drew McIntyre on night 2. Gunther and Sheamus at Clash at the Castle. That was my WWE match of the year in 2022. I had it as my number 2 overall match of the year behind only the Trilogy with the Briscoes and FTR. I lumped all 3 of their matches together in one entry. How do you make it better? You add Drew McIntyre. And you end up with 3 guys beating the holy hell out of each other. And Gunther powerbombing Sheamus onto McIntyre and then powerbombing McIntyre and pinning him to retain the title. When this match was over, the announcers, they all stood up and they applauded. I would have done the same had I been there. The crowd gave them multiple standing ovations throughout the match. I lost count of how many. As much as I really wanted to see Sheamus finally win that damn title, it takes nothing away from the greatness of this match. This was the best Intercontinental title match of WrestleMania in 30 years. At least. What else can be said about the job that WWE has done with Gunther and the job that he has done in restoring prestige to that Intercontinental title? And to think, there was a period where we went something like 7 years at WrestleMania without a defense of that championship. It's disgraceful. This man defends the title 1 time, and it's the best Intercontinental title match in 3 decades. And the way things are shaping up for next year's WrestleMania, it looks like he may have the chance to top that because it doesn't look like he's getting his hands on the world title anytime soon. Number 3 in the countdown is Kenny Omega against Will Osprey for the IWGP United States Championship at Forbidden Door in Toronto on June 25th. Will Osprey hasn't even started full-time with AEW yet. He only just signed his contract last month. And here he is on an AEW show in number 3. Imagine what he'll do next year. This was the rematch from Wrestle Kingdom. They were in Canada, so of course Omega had the crowd firmly on his side. 2 of the best in the world. You put them in the ring together, great things will happen. Except that Tiger Driver spot, where Osprey dropped Omega straight down on his head. When Omega gets his inevitable neck surgery in the next few years, he may regret that spot. But there was Omega kicking out of his own one-winged angel at 1. 1! And the crowd went nuts. There were some great dramatic near falls down the stretch. Both men bled. Don Callis got ejected from ringside early in the match, only to come back out later and interfere anyway. Cody Rhodes can relate. It's very, very dumb. And that took the match down a few notches for me, but they still had an outstanding battle. Osprey comes out on top in the end. He gets his win back. He gets his belt back after the Tokyo Dome. Which leads me to number 2 on this list, which is Kenny Omega against Will Osprey for the IWGP United States Championship. Sound familiar? Did you hit the rewind button by accident? No, you did not. Number 2 is their first encounter from Wrestle Kingdom 17 at the Tokyo Dome on January 4th. Omega and Osprey, they go back-to-back here in the top 3. I ranked their first match higher than their second. I liked it a little bit more. The roles were reversed. Osprey had been a heel in New Japan, or maybe a tweener at best, but he had been a heel. Omega was a babyface in AEW. But here, it was clear pretty early that Omega was the heel. And Osprey was the one they were building sympathy for. This was Kenny Omega's return to New Japan for the first time since AEW launched. And he put on a performance that we had not seen out of him in a very long time. It was New Japan Kenny Omega. It was the cleaner Kenny Omega. And he was a vicious SOB in this match. My only real critique is that there were one too many near falls. There were so many V-triggers. Just too many V-triggers. And I wish they would have toned it down, but the work here was just so damn good. And I always love New Japan's camera work. I think it adds so much to the presentation. Omega connects with Kota Ibushi's Kamigoye, and then a one-winged angel to win the title. This was revenge for Kenny is what this was. That's why he was so dominant here, and why he used the Kamigoye, because it was Will Ospreay who concussed his best friend Kota Ibushi with the Hidden Blade at Wrestle Kingdom in 2019, which just so happened to be the same night as Omega's final New Japan match against Hiroshi Tanahashi at the end of the show. He wanted Ibushi with him in the main event in his corner, but he was hurt. So the Young Bucks were out there in Kenny's corner instead. So he beats Ospreay and he takes his title. And then they come back at Forbidden Door and they do the rematch. I was hoping for a third act at Wembley Stadium, but we never got it. But this match happened only 4 days into the year, and there has not been another match that has topped it for me, except for this last match. And it is number 1 in the countdown. It is my match of the year for 2023. It is Bryan Danielson against MJF in a 60-minute Iron Man match for the AEW World Championship at Revolution on March 5th. In my opinion, the greatest Iron Man match of all time. Which means Bryan Danielson can claim the honor of best Iron Man match and best strap match of all time in the same year. Iron Man matches are tough. Ask anybody who's ever been in one and done interviews about it, and even just use common sense, right? They're tough. Besides the physical aspect, and honestly, it's only as physically taxing as you make it, because it's pro wrestling, and you can work the match at whatever pace you want to work the match at. It's not real. You can take breaks if you need to, right? I mean, you dictate the pace. But it can be very difficult to hold people's attention when they know the match is going 60 no matter what. And it's really the last 10 or 15 minutes that matter the most anyway. You've got to craft a really good story and work extra hard to keep people invested the rest of the time. I would think that's way harder to do than any of the physical stuff. I mean, these guys are pros. They're out there working every week. That stuff is second nature to them. It's the other stuff that makes it hard. And they did that. They found a way to keep the match interesting the whole way through. There are peaks and valleys, but I was never bored. And neither was the crowd. They were hot for this. They told a story. Bryan Danielson had been in plenty of marathon matches throughout his career, going back to his days in Ring of Honor. Something MJF had never done before. He had never been tested like this before. Danielson said MJF he would not be able to survive 60 minutes. It took 26 before Danielson scored the first fall. And then when Danielson tried for another Busaiku knee, MJF gave him a low blow right in front of the referee. Got himself disqualified. Now he was down 2 falls to none. Why would he do that? Because without any rest periods, which this match did not have, he could immediately pin Danielson and pick up a fall for himself, which he did. Very smart. Then he covered him again, and he got a second pinfall. Even smarter. And just like that, they were tied. That was unique. That was a clever spot. I'd never seen that done before in an Iron Man match. 40 minutes in, MJF went up 3-2. Both men ended up a bloody mess. Then we got the 5-minute time call, and there was this great sense of urgency. Time expired. They were both knotted up at 3 falls apiece. So, to sudden death they went, right? Tony Khan said, we're going to sudden death. As they treated MJF with an oxygen tank. This man had never gone 60 minutes in his life. He needed a fucking oxygen tank, which was hilarious. And the oxygen tank is what ended up playing into the finish. The referee did not see him use the oxygen tank on Bryan. When Bryan reached outside to grab him to pull him back inside, he got whacked in the head with it. And then in the end, not only did MJF beat Bryan Danielson, But he got Danielson to do the unthinkable. He got him to tap out in his own hold, in the label lock. He didn't pass out, he tapped out. Would have been very easy for him to just pass out, right? As the top star, right? He refuses to quit, so he passes out instead. No, he tapped out, and that's how you put somebody over. So as big as it was for MJF to get that win over Kenny Omega, and for Omega to say the nice things that he said about him when the match was over, nobody did more to legitimize MJF in 2023 than Bryan Danielson. Danielson knew what his job was that night, and for a guy, an MJF who a lot of people thought just had a mouth and nothing more, right? Oh, he can't work, he's not a great worker, he barely ever wrestles anyway, especially on TV. MJF shut a lot of people up this year with matches like this one. He wrestled the match of his life. And it is the greatest Iron Man match of all time. And those are your top 20 matches, all ranked for 2023. Now you get to let me know. What does your list look like? What's your top 3? What's your top 5 or top 10? You let me know, because I'm sure your list is going to look different than mine. And let us take a moment here to remember many of the wrestlers that we lost this year, including Jay Briscoe, Bray Wyatt, Superstar Billy Graham, the Iron Sheik, Terry Funk, Jerry Jarrett, Lanny Poffo, Bushwhacker Butch, Sheik Adnan Al-Kaisi, Darren Drozdov, and Mantar all passed away this year.